My name is Ed Sherwood. The first symposium was done in 1994, and the purpose was to have industry on both sides of the river in Nuevo Laredo and Laredo interact with government officials and keep up to date with environmental issues. At the time, industry was concerned about pollution in Nuevo Laredo and also in the river. The government on the U.S. side had started to fund a sewage treatment plant in Nuevo Laredo, and the industry was anxious to hear about that progress and other environmental issues. The first symposium was held at the La Posada in 1994. It was sponsored by the Laredo Manufacturers Association. I had the privilege of chairing the first symposium. Mark Pease, who was past president of LMA, actually named the event as a symposium without knowing that symposium meant a drinking affair. The industry wanted to keep informed not only about environmental issues, but also about things that would affect cross-border trade, items that would affect the labor market on both sides of the river. Most of the industry, the heavy industry, was located at that time in Nuevo Laredo, but there was warehousing and distribution centers connected with those industries on the Laredo side. So we had to, as an industry, keep in touch with the local and national officials about all regulations that affected industry. The symposium was a success from the start, but it really took off when at the time, the Laredo Economic Development Corporation took over chairing and guiding the events. That was in 2001. John Adams was the leading figure at the time, and then later on, Joseph Mendiola from the staff of the corporation and Ivan Rodriguez put together some very expanding and exciting symposiums.
I'm Bill Green, publisher of Laredo Morning Times and a member of the board of the Laredo Economic Development Corporation for the past 35 years. And what happened here, and many of us also belonged to the Laredo Manufacturers Association back then, which we called LMA. We realized there was a need for some symposium, particularly to address the environmental needs of the community.
I'm Mark Pease. I'm from Laredo, Texas now for the last 40 years, and I was a maquiladora manager, arrived here in '83. Once we had formed the Laredo Manufacturing Association, we had a group of committee on maquiladoras. And one of the things was that we were getting a bad deal, being that we weren't considered very friendly to the environment, and we were said we were polluters of the rivers and so forth and so on. So one day that when we had a board meeting, Ed Sherwood was there, and we decided we needed to have a committee and have a forum where we could present to the different members that wanted to come and other people from the village that could come and tell them what we did as good citizens. And Ed Sherwood volunteered, and I said, great, you got it. He was the chairman of the first symposium and did a fantastic job, so we said, you got it for life.
Well, a lot of years here at Laredo, working with a lot of old friends of mine from different backgrounds, but eventually all of us here together looking for the same thing, trying to build business in the city and help the area grow. People like Ed Sherwood and Mark Pease, Bill Green, and a bunch of others that I could name that, like I say, worked very closely together over the years.
This is a lot of history. It goes back a number of years back. I go back as far as the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And what I recall back then is how the stakeholders, trade stakeholders, which included the banking community of Laredo, was heavily involved in the promotion of bringing trade and industry and creating jobs as economic developers to Laredo back then. We would look forward to this symposium based on the research that Laredo State University then, which is now Texas A&M International University, was doing, providing macroeconomic indicators of Laredo and Laredo and the importance of our strategic location. So we would look forward to the research and analysis by then Dr. Kashfa Fatimi, who headed up this project with the university, and working together with business leaders like Ignacio Uravazo and others in the banking community, in the chamber and the Laredo Development Foundation and Frank Leach, everybody coming together, looking forward to the latest data. And this was an annual event. From there, it began to evolve and grow as the numbers began to prove how important a role we played, and then it began to attract other speakers and presenters at the symposium.
The joint presentation of the program, or the merging, was a product of all the different leadership in the community with the LMA and LDF and the chamber and everyone. We realized that a lot of people realized Dan Hastings, Ed Sherwood, Jerry Schwebel, the Zunigas. I mean, we had a lot of great players involved, and Laredo was really at a tremendous point of growth and activity. New bridges were being considered, trade was up. And so one of the key items is to make sure we were telling our story and attracting representatives from the state and federal government to come and participate in these meetings to really get a firsthand look on the ground of the impact of what trade was through the Port of Laredo. I think the contributing factors was, again, just the dynamics of the really large increase of trade. Of all the border crossings on the southern border, Laredo was number one. We heard stories that we were right behind a border crossing on the Canadian border in Long Beach and a couple of other things, fully realizing that, of course, with the growth of the city and the Maquila sector, and not just the Maquila sector in Nuevo Laredo across, but we were handling merchandise and goods from maquilas all over northern Mexico, as well as manufacturers and companies in Mexico that was entering the market. You have a surge in warehousing in Laredo. You have, like I indicated, the bridge is getting ready. New bridge is going in. Railroad is expanding. The intermodal yard just north of town is happening. So Laredo at that moment in time is at a tremendous point of growth, and to make sure that story is out there, because we would talk to a lot of people. We would go visit, we would go to Washington, Mexico City, and they did not have a grasp or understanding of the dynamics of the border. You can't understand the border until you go to the border. It's real simple, but it's not for someone at long distance. If we can't get there, we wanted them to come to Laredo to see what business was all about. Folks that came in from Washington who were making policy and doing things and had no understanding of the impact of what's going on. We had better understanding out of our partners in Mexico because they were doing cross-border trade. Obviously, the further you get away from the border, the less understanding it is. So even in DF, we had to attract people to come in. One of the most interesting groups that came in during this period was a group from Germany, of all places, and they were looking at crossings, I believe, on the German-Polish border, and they were talking about their challenges in queuing up 300 or 400 trucks during a daytime. Well, I remember I went with I think Dan Hastings and maybe Jerry Schwebel, and we took this group down to the border, and of course, within about an hour and a half, the bridge crossed over. They're counting over 300 trucks at the height of the crossings in the afternoon, and I believe that day we crossed 1,500 or so trucks one way, and then it didn't include the railroads. And they were just absolutely dumbfounded and says, no one understands what the dynamics of this border is. And they really never have since the 1880s. It's since the railroad first came through Laredo and then the port of entry, until you see it and you appreciate it, and the people and the dynamics that make it work. And that's another thing. It's so important, is the cooperation on both sides of the border that people do not understand, the linkages between organizations and companies, and how that has gone through the years. And it unarms some people because it's hard for them to understand unless they participate in it.
Former president and CEO of the Laredo Economic Development Corporation. So around the year of 2013, the LEDC was undergoing a time of transition, and it became essential for us to evaluate the LEDC's priorities, as well as what was moving in the direction of getting those accomplished and what things were expendable. The symposium was around its 17th year, and it took an inordinate amount of time throughout the year for planning and organization. With a small staff of 5, it obviously became one of the first things we looked at in doing a time benefit analysis. The priorities of the LEDC can generally be summed up into 3 categories. Marketing is an integral part of what the LEDC does, primarily to national and international markets for the attraction and growth of industry. It also provides a great information resource and support services for not only our prospects, but our community and primarily our trade partners, which are trade and transportation, education, workforce, and real estate development community. And lastly, it must maintain and achieve a level of financial solvency outside of our government contracts. So in doing our assessment of the symposium, we quickly and clearly came to the evaluation and assessment that the symposium provides a profound and significant impact towards achieving those priorities.
It's impressive that the LEDC has been able to carry on this tradition of putting Laredo on the map year after year, now hosting the 30th Annual Pathways for Trade Symposium this year. We bring experts from several states, and in some cases several countries, to come to Laredo and share their expertise and perspective on global trade. The Pathways for Trade Symposium is attended by a wide range of stakeholders. We have bankers, landowners, developers, distribution and manufacturing company representatives, construction companies, real estate professionals, government officials, railroad executives, college and university officials, and we even set aside space for students interested in supply chain and global trade.